present. So we'll go ahead and start with the agenda prep review.
Madam President, members of the board, good evening. I'll start on item 4, which the board will consider order canvassing the May 6, 2023 election for the purpose of electing 2 trustees. Item 4A, issued a certificate of election to candidates elected on May 6, 2023 to serve on the Board of Trustees. Item B, file statement, officer by elected candidates to serve on the Board of Trustees. Item C, administer oath of office to the elected candidates on May 6, 2023 election to serve on the Board of Trustees. And item 5 is consideration and approval of an order canvassing the bond election returns. Item 6, consider canvassing the May 6, 2023 election for attendant credit election returns. And then we'll begin with item 7, which is public forum. Item 8, the superintendent's report. Coach Walsh will be leading our item A, student recognition, where we will have our athletes and our special education students who are athletes in Special Olympics honored. Item B, we will have our superintendent's student leadership council, which are students from grades 5 through 12 from all campuses who meet with me monthly to discuss a wide variety of topics. And then item 8C, we will have a proclamation for Mental Health Awareness Month. If someone will, I think we did this last year at the same time. Item 9, reports and information items. Item 9A, the Board of Trustees, we will have a redistricting committee progress update. Item B, we will have an academic update. It's the high school. Item 9C, end of year SHAC report by Mrs. Vogel. Item 9D, we'll have an operations update. We'll update the board, number 1, on the new central office update. Stan Tech will be here to present. D2, we will present our child nutrition summer feeding plan update. Item E, we'll have our quarterly investment report and our quarterly financial report. Item 10, we'll have the approval of the consent agenda items, the approval of the minutes for the regular scheduled board meeting on April 17, 2023, and special board meeting on May 1st, 2023. And then item 11, items for action A1, consider approval of the SHAC committee members for 2-year terms 2023 to 2025. Ms. Vogel will have that information. Item 11B, finance 1, consider approval of the June 19th, 2023 for a public hearing on the tax rate and budget for the 2023-2024 school year. Mr. Doyle will present that. Item B2, discuss the renewal of membership in Walsh Gallegos retainer program. I think Mr. Doyle will present that also. And B3, consider approval of budget amendments. We have 3 budget amendments currently. Item 12, closed session is authorized by section 551.074 of the Texas Education Code. A, discuss the recommended hiring of a principal for San Marcos High School. Item 12B, discuss the recommended hiring of a principal for Miller Middle School. Item 13, open session, the board will reconvene from closed session to take action if necessary on the items discussed in closed session. Item 13A, consider approval of the recommended hiring of a principal for San Marcos High School. And item 13B, consider approval of the recommended hiring of a principal for Miller Middle School. And Madam President, that's all that the administration has at this time.
Ms. Halsey?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Conan, could you please be sure to include in the board book not only the list of members who are being recommended for the SHAC committee, but also could we get an outline of the process that we're using to select and implement that, including the terms that are served, et cetera? I think that it's been a little while since we've been updated on that, so if we could just get a refresher, that would be great. Thanks.
You.
Anyone else? Okay. And we'll move on to our budget workshop.
Good evening, Board. We are here to present our May 23 budget workshop this evening. Along with me is Stephanie Munoz and Dale Mitchell from HR. So what we will cover tonight, Greg, there you go. The revenue projection is first and foremost that we'll look at. Then we'll look at the budget projection based off that revenue. And then we'll look at some staffing scenarios and projections as well. So next slide, you'll see looking at both 2023 projection as we close out this year, and then also a 23-24 early projection. So as we close out this year, we're looking at roughly about $81 million in revenue collection. Looking at into next year, closer to that 81 and a half projection. So you'll see that that 81 is different from last time. There's a few reasons why. First off, I have received all of our CAD values, property values, certified estimates, and again, we're seeing another increase in those, roughly 15 to 17% of property value. That does increase our recapture amount that we owe back. That recapture amount has been calculated back into this projection, so that 81 is a pretty true number. I worked with Moat Casey Rep this morning. We walked our budget template, looked at all the scenarios, if you will, and that 81 figure is pretty accurate as of right now. The other part of it is we also, within this factor, is first through fifth 6 weeks data versus last time we met, it was first through fourth 6 weeks data. So it does have that shift, right? So I wanted to present this information as well. You'll see two columns or two rows. The first row is a basic allotment figure, 6160. So playing the hypothetical game of if nothing passes in legislation this year, we remain at a figure of a basic allotment of 6160. That revenue projection right now is $79.5 million. So there's a little piece of information, right, in statute. Anytime the basic allotment is adjusted, then there's certain percentages of that adjustment that have to go towards salary increases, 30% of your total gain. You'll see along that 6160 row, there's no net gain. You also see that there's no 30% increase, and you will talk about that 75-25% here in a second. And that leaves us with a figure of a recapture payment, if you will, around $8.7 million. So going to that basic allotment, right? Statute says if that basic allotment increases, for any increase there is, then the district needs to take 30% of their year-over-year increase total and apply it toward increasing employee compensation. So under that current law, that statute, if you will, 75% of that total gain must go toward teachers, librarians, counselors, and nurses. 25% of that must go to increase compensation for all other full-time district employees. So what you see here is the 6250 basic allotment. This is also a figure that's in House Bill 100, which is moved from the House over to the Senate, and there's still some debate, if you will. But this one, when you look at readings and hear the talk, this is the one that has a lot of movement, right? So on a 6250 basic allotment, you can see that revenue of $81.4 million. Our total gain, if you will, year-over-year gain would be approximately $2.8 million. 30% of that gain is $860,000. And then you can see the top number, that's $654,000 is 75% that would have to go toward teachers, librarians, counselors, and nurses. And the 212 is the other full-time district employees. That also generates a recapture payment of $7.7 million. Next slide. You can see some themes, if you will, or some recurring numbers. Looking at a revenue projection from the past, starting in 18-19 school year, all the way up to what we're looking at in the 23-24 school year. You can see those numbers are pretty consistent, right? From $79 million in 1920 to in what we're projecting if HB 100 moves through, a revenue projection of 81.47 excuse me. So looking at what we budget for operations and maintenance, right? So this would be the account or the budget for all ancillary, if you will, paying for electric bills, fuel costs, what have you. You can see, again, it's broken out of several years and the percentages, but if you really look, again, we go from last year, 22-23, of a figure of 14.6 million to 23-24, a figure of 18.9. That really is not a huge inflation, or it's accounting for the inflation that has affected fuel costs, electrical costs, utilities, things that we can't avoid and we have to budget for. And you really see those trends kind of mimic those inflationary trends that we're seeing out there in the world. Looking at our capital outlay projects on the next page, you can see that we've also have a budget line for 23-24. Those are obligated costs, if you will, roughly 6.5 million. So keep in mind that's our central office building and what's yet to be paid. Currently, if you look at that 327,000 in actuals for 21-23, I just want to point out that that comes from current abatement that we've had at central office, and also accounting for a couple of boilers that we had to replace here at San Marcos High School. So that being said, that's the budgetary piece that will set up our conversation with HR. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Munoz.
All right, so we are going to share some info about insurance and benefit projections, our pay systems overview, historical data. We'll talk to you about our TASB salary survey and some scenarios, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So our next slide. So our insurance and benefit projections. At this time, TRS Healthcare has not taken to their board to approve rates. And so we typically see that in June. We are hearing that rates will remain the same. If you see, our bottom number that we pay for total annual cost is $4.7 million that we pay on behalf of our employees for health insurance. So we are going to keep watching this, and should this change, we will bring it to the board. But as of right now, we do pay $364 every month for each employee on our health plan. Our next slide, for those of you who are new to our board or have not seen how we do our pay, this gives you just kind of an overview about how our pay systems and our ranges. Every year we bring all of our pay grades to the board for approval, and this talks about how our minimums, our midpoint, and our maximums work. We work with TASB each year to look at maintenance and what do we need to fix, if anything, on our pay grades. Are we competitive within our market? You'll see our peers that we do compare with are the list right there, and we look every year, are we paying our teachers accordingly to the market, or are there certain years that we need to look at? And we do that across the board for our custodians all the way to our teachers and to counselors. Every position gets a review just to make sure we are competitive with our neighbors.
So as we look at our neighbors in our comparison, we have a large number of districts to whom we compare. However, we tend to look closely at Seguin and New Braunfels as an example. Also Hayes, Lockhart, and Comal. Those are the ones we tend to compare with the most. And as you look at the market salary comparisons, you'll see that we're right there, about third out of the sixth. We're right under Seguin and New Braunfels when it comes to teacher salary compensation at this time. And that's, we're about 2,000 below Seguin, but about 800 above Comal. And I will say that we've been told already Comal is looking to give a 3% increase. And so as we created this plan and looked at the recommendations from TASB, we kept those kinds of things in mind. So we do anticipate some market comparison going up. We also wanted to look at our teacher compensation takeaways. And one of the things that with the salary study and the compensation study we noticed is that we knew this already. A large number of our teachers come to us as first-year teachers or as teachers with less than 5 years experience. So of our total teacher pool, we have about 30% who are less than 5 years experience. And of those with less than 5 years experience, 75% are first-year teachers. They come to us with zero experience. So we have a great relationship with Texas State. You guys have approved a lot of our programs, and so it gets people here. We just want to make sure that we can be competitive and keep them here. So we are going to propose a few plans to you, and we're going to keep this in mind. We want to make sure that we continue to draw in qualified teachers, but we also want to support and retain the teachers with experience that we currently have in our district. So, the wrong way. Oh, no, historically. So historically, our historical compensation increases, you guys have been very generous as a board, and I've included the last 5 years of what you've approved for compensation for teachers as well as our administrative and our auxiliary and clerical. And then on the bottom, you'd see the incentives that you were able to approve and we brought forth in the past 3 years. So we want to make sure that you have that information with you before you make a decision tonight so that you can kind of look at a historical comparison. And then we're going to present 4 models, and it's really it's a 3 model plus the last one's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. So as we worked with TASB, they recommended 3 different things. One is a 2% GPI, which is a general pay increase, and that would bring our starting salary to $53,000. Right now, we're at 52. That is a couple of thousand below Seguin, but it is also above 3 other comparisons that we look at. Another model that they talked to us about was a 3% GPI, which would bring our starting salary to $53,500, and then a 4% GPI, which would bring our starting salary to $54,000, which is currently where Seguin is now. So that's the closest when it comes to that. We also, as a department, as an HR department, wanted to look at something a little different. So we're going to introduce you a 4th option, which is the 4% increase with a longevity adjustment in order to remain competitive with anticipated new teachers and to retain and honor our current teachers. So the first model, the 2% GPI, starting salary, would bring us up to a $53,000 starting point, which would catch us up to our peers, and as long as there were no other adjustments made in the market, we would stay competitive. However, the likelihood that other districts not make that adjustment is very small. So with a 2% GPI, we would be more aligned. It would improve our educator pathway and really work on our internal equity. And as you can see in the graph here, I'm colorblind, so I'm going to guess that bottom line is orange. The orange is us currently. And then the dotted line would be our new salary if we were to approve a 2% GPI. It would make us competitive with our current peers. However, that's if nothing changes within the market. So a 2% GPI would raise our starting salary and make us competitive and get us to where we are. Currently, we're at about 98% of the market. This would bring us to 100%. Model number 2, a 3% GPI, would bring our starting salary to $53,500. Now that does move us into 100% of the market, and it maintains, if they move, we would move up accordingly. For example, I mentioned that Comal we know is going to pass a 3%. By doing this, we would maintain equity with this and keep right about in the middle. And it does, again, improve the teacher pathway and internal equity. It would keep us competitive, as you'll see in the graph. I went forward on here. There it is. You'll see in the graph a 3% increase would keep us competitive even if our market peers increase theirs a little bit. Does that make sense? We would maintain. And so a 3% GPI would bring our starting salary up to something that's more competitive and maintain. However, we would not be at the top. If we were to look at Model 3 is a 4% GPI, that's in all areas, would bring our starting salary to $54,000. That would put us at 102 and 103% of the market. And even if our competitors were to pass increases, we would still be at the top of that particular comparison. So it would maintain our position at the top. And again, we know that we're going to have some of our competitors are going to pass those raises. And so this would be the most aggressive and the most competitive if we were to pass a 4% GPI. The 4th model is basically this model with a little kick to it. Oh, that's the graph that shows that we would remain competitive. Model number 4, we created in HR what we're calling a longevity plan to honor the teachers who have been with our district for 5 years or longer. And so as you'll see, it's basically the 4% model. However, for each year that a teacher maintains their employment with San Marcos, we would add 0.25% each year. So for a teacher who's been here for 5 years, they wouldn't just get a 4% increase, they would get a 4.25% increase. And a teacher who has been here 6 years would get a 4.5% increase. So as you can see in column, what was it, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth column over, you'll see in the darker box, I've included that percent increase. And so it really does go a long way to showing our teachers who maintain their employment with us that we do value them. So for example, if I have a teacher who has been in our district for, let's say, 15 years, they'll earn as you're going across, they'll earn the 23.25, which is the 4% increase. Their salary would increase by $2,325. However, they would earn an additional 2.75% as in honor of being in our district for a longer, which would bring them to a total of, it would give them a $3,900 boost instead of just a $2,300 bump. So every year that you would maintain employment with our district would get an additional 0.25%. And when we looked at the difference in those two salaries, as we'll see in just a second, the difference to honor those employees is about $267,000 from Model 3 to Model 4. And that would be for our teacher plan. So then we've included just, the TASB recommends a 2 to 4% general pay increase, not only for teachers, but for administrators, clerical, and auxiliary. So their recommendation is 2 to 4% across the board, depending on if we want to maintain or if we want to get ahead of the competition. And then I've included a slide that will show you all 4 of those models with the cost across the board, what a 2% increase would mean for clerical, for auxiliary, and for our teachers and nurses as well. Again, the difference in the Model 3 and Model 4 is only a difference in the teacher salary, which is about $267,000, but that does honor the longevity of our teachers in our district. Did I do all that, Mike? Did I get it right, Mike?
Yes, sir.
One's back. Okay, back to Mike.
I have one question. Can I interrupt? The cost estimate you're showing on the second to last row, explain that, please.
So if we were to Model 1, if we were to do a 2% increase, it would add to our current budget, our current salary, $1.3 million.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And bring the total salary cost, whatever the number is in the bottom.
And so to expand on that question, if you go to the next page, you'll see a breakdown of Model 1, 2, 3, and 4, and its overall impact in terms of what the effects on the budget, right? So you can see I've broken out the top numbers of revenue stays pretty consistent, right? You have your figure of your revenue minus your recapture, bringing us to that revenue of that $81.4 million figure. You can see along each model the percent increase based on teacher, other professional staff, and classified. Then you also see how it affects your total compensation, right? So if you look at Model 1 plan, for example, you can see that $78.7 million for compensation, the stagnant figure of 18.9 for your operation and maintenance budget, and that's static across each row, and then the overall deficit per plan. So for example, if you look at Model 1, you can see that it would run a $16 million deficit. You also can see that there's an account for our central office building, as well as the new Marshall program, which would then add to that deficit total. So Model 1 would lead to a $23.6 million deficit. You can then see the estimated fund balance according to June of 23. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay, of $56.3 million. With a projected ending fund balance of 32.7. We also have a stagnant figure across that the row of a 3-month operational. I say stagnant, but it adjusts for each compensation plan, and then its overall impact on the unassigned fund balance, right? So Model 1 would provide an unassigned fund balance of $8.3 million, and you can see as it goes across to Model 4, with the 4% GPI and the longevity increase and its overall impact.
We've talked, oh, I'm sorry.
Last but not least, the last slide, I wanted to evaluate the timeline, and then we can open it up for discussion. Here we are, May 1st. We're looking at salary scenarios and considering compensation. May 15th is obviously our next school board meeting. June 5th is also an opportunity for another budget workshop if necessary. And still, we're on target and plan at the June 19th regular school board meeting to both hold our public hearing for tax rates and our budget and approve the budget for the 23-24 school year.
Mr. Shanks?
So, going back to the page you had before, and just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So, we'll just use Model 1 as an example. If we give that pay raise, at the end of that, our expected fund balance would be 8.324?
No, our projected fund balance would be that 32.7 after accounting for the
The
3
20, yeah, with the 3 months operating cost.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be the remaining available
Yes.
outside of that, okay? So, bear with me here. So next year, if nothing changed and we didn't give pay raises, where would we get the money to fund these pay raises that we give this year if we only have a fund balance remaining of 8.3 outside of the 3-month operating budget?
So you have to look back at our unassigned, our both assigned and unassigned fund balance. So it wouldn't bring it down to 8.3 totally. That's what's left over after we have accounted for other projects and things of that nature. Our fund balance would still, projected ending would be that 32, 33-ish. So, and then all on top of that, you're also looking at revenue coming in for next year, right? So going back to the historical trends, somewhere between 80, 83 million in revenue coming in.
Okay, I'm not
You're-
sure that cleared it up for me. I understand the 32 million is what we would have remaining in fund balance. So we're basically spending 24 out of the fund balance to fund these pay raises, right?
Right.
24 million. Well, at the end of that.
No. I'm sorry, no.
No?
It would be.
Am I not reading this right?
No, I apologize for that. Let me get this bigger. For some reason, it's caught here. Okay, so going through again, you would have to then factor in the, going back, you'd have to look at your revenue from year to year to year, right? Now, looking at Model 1, right, you do see that the deficit, the budget deficit would be that 23.6. The other thing to consider is that 6.9 for central office should come off of that line as well, because we're going to close that project off next year. So that's going to be off the table. School marshal program would, again, has to be budgeted for, but those deficits going into next year wouldn't have that 6.9 line item in there as well. So it does, that also influences the fund balance and projection going out for 24, 25 and years to go.
What's our monthly personnel cost?
Monthly personnel cost, have to, don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to look at a figure. I could figure that out though for you.
I think we need to share with the board members like what the monthly personnel costs are and then what we receive in revenues throughout the year, which I think we've talked about before, but
Right.
that gets to what Mr. Shanks is trying to ask.
The state legislature approves for us to have the armed guards in the school. Would we be eligible for any of that money and not have to spend our own?
We, depending on which bill, yes, we would be eligible
One
for
of the
that
bills
allotment,
was talking
yes.
about that.
Yes, that allotment would be tied to putting forth different measures, school safety measures.
And so that we wouldn't have to be out of pocket on that.
Well,
Well,
one of the bills would give us about $230,000 for the district. So it'd cover about half the cost of the Marshall Plan. It raises the basic safety allotment from $9.72 currently to like $15 or something like that per student.
Mr. Arredondo, you have a question or a comment?
Thank you, President Cantu. I have several questions, if my colleagues will indulge me. Mr. Doyle, in this presentation on the last page from my colleagues where it says budget scenarios based on salary models, we have models 1, 2, 3, and 4, all based on the hypothetical that the board give a raise sometime this year. So if we were not to give a raise based on the cost projections on a previous slide, our budget deficit would still be in excess of $14 million, correct?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. So even with no raise, there's still a significant withdrawal from fund balance. Of that 14 million, 6 is not reoccurring, is it? Or about 7 is not reoccurring because it's central office?
Correct.
So had the board, and I voted in favor of the central office because there was a panic that if we didn't do it, it would be more expensive, and if we wait, and it'd be irresponsible to take it to the voters, et cetera, we would have in excess of $8 additional million in fund balance to consider one of these proposals this evening. In addition to that, and this is for my colleagues, or my soon-to-be predecessors in the gallery, it's interesting that we're presented with a budget that reflects $14 million in deficit spending, and now the onus is on the school board of, do we give raises, and are we the fiscally irresponsible ones, or are we fiscally irresponsible for asking staff or allowing staff to bring us a budget that was already 10+ million in excess of revenue? So as we debate and consider possible proposals this evening, I just want to point out that if the concern was a budget deficit, our fund balance, financial solvency of the ISD, I could believe that, or I guess I could wrap my head around that, if this board hadn't chosen to withdraw almost $10 million for a central office, or if this board had been committed to directing staff to bring us a balanced budget. So as we discuss and weigh options, I'm still leaning towards taking some action to provide a salary and benefit increase tonight to ISD employees. The unknowns that exist this evening are going to be the unknowns that exist later in May. But the thing that remains the same is contracts are going out. And we're asking teachers to sign blank contracts. And I remind some of my colleagues up here who had to do that one time in their profession, and just remind them and ask them to consider what message that sends if we disperse blank contracts to ISD employees, or if we say we're going to kick this down the road to find out what the legislature's going to do. If we were concerned with that, maybe we wouldn't have spent $7, $8, $9 million on a central office. Maybe we would have prioritized salary and benefit increases. Maybe we would have saved that money. I don't know. But
Madam President?
that's where I am.
Dr. Salmi?
Yeah, Mr. Mitchell, can you tell us how many of the past 5 years we've sent out contracts without pay in them?
Contracts don't have the salary amount listed specific. It just allows that they have a position with the district.
Okay, so that's a pretty standard practice. Thank you.
And they also have the chart that has the per year of experience.
The
how much
compensation,
is-
yes, ma'am.
Does that go out with contracts or not?
It doesn't go out with the contracts, and that would be updated once. Currently, the compensation manual we have is in place on the website, and it's public knowledge, and if the board takes action, then we would update it. If not, then the current compensation manual would remain in place. Compensation plan would remain in place.
And do any one of you know how much we're spending on leasing the current administration building?
Again, I don't have that off the top of my head. I can look that up for you, real quick.
Ballpark?
A year,
Alicia?
roughly
A year.
150,000 plus.
Something in that nature.
It has a 2% increase per year in monthly charges. It's about 14
14, 15.
and change.
Ms. Halsey?
Thank you. Just to be clear that while the teacher increases have not appeared in the contracts, we have, over the past few years, sometimes approved them in April, sometimes approved them in May, and sometimes approved them in June. So sometimes teachers have known before they sign their contracts what we had agreed on, and sometimes they don't. So there's really no
The last 3 years, we've been able to follow this timeline where we present in May, and then in June, you approve the budget. So we've been able to communicate out what the new increases will be for teachers and all staff the last 3 years, so that this first week of May, teachers are signing their contract, or the second week of May, and they already have that posted on our website.
Right, and I certainly think it's ideal to be able to communicate to our teachers and our staff what increases we will or won't have before they sign their contracts, but I just wanted to make the point that that's not always been possible. Also, we don't yet know what the state's going to do in terms of increasing the basic allotment and what then the requirement will be on us for any portion of that allotment to go to teacher increases, which makes me a little hesitant to move too far ahead of this, because we've done that in the past and then the state hasn't recognized that, much in the way that the state now is not recognizing the fact that we have expenses and they're going to put us into recapture, even though those expenses will then put us into debt, right? So that's frustrating. But I would like to go back to the slide that's the basic allotment adjustment, which I noted that in the more generous allotment increase on line 2, it also decreased the recapture amount, which I'm assuming is because of the requirement to put 30% of the total gain to teachers, that then somehow that triggers something where we have to pay less in recapture. I'm hoping that they at least did that.
It's a portion of that, yes.
Okay. So then which scenario did you take to draw the budget scenarios based on salary models in model 1, 2, 3? Is there any, because that doesn't look like the lower, it does look like the lower recapture payments. Are you assuming this, that we are going to get that $150 allotment increase, or what?
Correct. The models that you see in that last budget sheet that you see works off that figure of 81.47, assuming that House Bill 100 is approved.
And House Bill 100 gives what?
It increases that basic allotment up to, from 6160 to 6250.
Because on the car ride here, they were talking about $150 basic allotment increase.
And this is just
No.
a $90.
90.
Yeah,
According to what passed the House, right, is next year in 23-24, you'd see a 6250 basic allotment, and then in 24-25, it would actually increase up to 6300. Now, that's the bill that's come from the House to the Senate. The Senate still has time to make their recommendations and amendments to be able to pass it out of the Senate side.
okay.
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. My question is current vacancy rate in ISD positions. Are we 100% staffed right now? If I visited the HR website, how many positions are vacant?
We are not. I can get that number. I want to say we're about 29 vacancies at this point. I can pull the number up. We're just finishing the teacher transfer window, and so we've had some teachers that will transfer campuses or transfer positions. I want to say about 29 teacher vacancies at this point. We can get an exact number.
So of those vacancies, how many have been year-long vacancies? Like they've been posted, been accepting applications, but there's just no one applying or inability to fill?
About, I would say, again, rough estimate without having exact number, probably about 20 of those.
y'all know what that would estimate in terms of payroll cost?
72.
72,000 that we budget for teachers with fringe benefits, times that 20.
I guess the reason why I ask is I don't see the dynamic in hiring changing next year. Does this forecast with the projected budget deficit have us 100% staffed, or does it reflect 20% vacancy?
And I would say from an HR perspective, working with TASB, we're really trying to understand what other districts are doing so that we can be very transparent with posting our teacher salary pay grade early. Because the goal would be to retain our teachers. And if there's new positions for new teachers that we have openings to recruit. And so that's something from, our recruitment side of the house, we're trying to make sure that we have that information listed and that it's updated based on whatever you all approve. Because our postings, if you see our website now, we're already posting for next school year. We've already started receiving resignations, retirements, and people that know they're not gonna be returning, but to have the best updated salary reflective so that our new hires see what the true entry level or step schedule is gonna be, would help us fill our vacancies sooner.
And I appreciate that. I guess my question is, this past budget year, the board allocated funds
Correct.
to pay for every position that was posted by HR,
Correct.
including the positions that have remained unfilled all year. Not the ones of recent resignations or transfers or any of that. I'm not talking about the new ones that just might have popped up in the last couple of weeks. The ones that have remained vacant, if not this calendar year, but maybe even last calendar year, as y'all continue to try and fill these positions. So my question is, in this budget projection, does it reflect that there's excess vacancies, or this is if we staffed everything and everything is paid for?
This is if everything is staffed and everything is paid for.
Okay, so if the job market doesn't change, unless it does in some way or the other, like, can we anticipate, again, staffing, hiring challenges similar to this year?
We can.
And so those will remain, if we don't fill those vacancies, they're budgeted for, but they wouldn't be filled vacancies.
Ms. Cantu, just clarifying question, Mr. Andando said 20% vacancies, that was 20 total.
20 total.
Okay, great.
I apologize for misspeaking.
I had another question. This longevity, this plus longevity plan, I think you said it is about $267,000 over the 4% with no longevity.
Correct.
That's basically the same amount could be added to any of the plans. So if we wanted to do a 3% with a longevity, we would
Correct.
then
Yes,
just
ma'am. We
add
could-
267,000 to that.
That is correct. It would be a little less, but yes, we could take
Roughly.
the same system and make it work for a 2% or a 3%. I
and-
think that, yeah, yes, ma'am, sorry.
Do you remember, or maybe it's in one of your graphs, what percentage or number of our staff that would affect? This is starting with 5 years of experience, right?
That's correct. I have that number on my computer.
Yeah, I think it's in your graph. Let's see.
I want to say it's somewhere about 600,
I mean, so
about
it's
300
70%.
about 350
Right.
of our staff, 375 of our staff would be the ones affected. For example, we have 19 teachers with 25 years or more experience. So I could go back and give you those exact numbers.
But I mean, your estimate, we have 30% who are in years 1 through 5.
Correct.
So then 70% of our teachers
Correct, yes,
would be
ma'am.
impacted by this $267,000 incentive program.
Yes, ma'am.
Solzy, did you have your hand up? Were you waiting for a question?
Well, I just wanted to go back to Trustee Shang's point that he brought up earlier. So if Mr. Doyle, what you said, that the basic allotment is scheduled to go up, or in theory, hopefully, it goes up one stage this year and then goes up another stage next year, that in terms of if we increase the pay rate this year, those are not one-time costs, so how they would carry over into the following year, we could assume that some of that increased allotment would help to bridge that gap, and we would also have the central office project finished. So while we don't have a projection right here for what that next year deficit would look like, we can assume, hopefully, that it would start to decrease unless, of course, our maintenance costs somehow surged again.
Right. The other concept is, going back to the law, right, any increase in basic allotment, so even in that 24-25, when you go up to 6,300, you do have to factor in that 30% of your gain going toward salary increase as well.
Okay, so then my next question is for Dr. Cardona, and is there any way, if we take action tonight, that we can word such action so that it will be counted toward any action the state takes, so that we don't get ourselves into that weird space where we've taken action ahead of the state and then we have to backtrack and now we've sort of
I don't know the
overcompensated.
answer. I can tell you historically, with anything we've done to be ahead of the game, the state has not benefited us.
Can you, I also see, because I was looking at the schedule for that, and I know we've talked about it, but it wasn't clear to me where that is in one of these models. It seems like it ought to have been in the 2019-2020 table, the historical compensation increases.
It is 1920.
Right, so that looks like what we're showing there, though, is what the board approved, not within the state then required us to retroactively approve.
I believe that year, the state indicated we had to pay up to 5 years a certain percentage, and then 6 plus a different percentage, so we had that pay compensation in accordance
We
with.
differentiated it that way. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Shanks?
Yeah, so this is normally not when we vote on teacher compensation. So is there an underlining reason that we're doing it tonight rather than in June? And is it, I mean, did HR come to Dr. Cardona and say, hey, we need to market, we need to make sure our salaries are updated so we can market better? Or is there some other motive to vote on this now versus wait until June like we normally do?
There is no reason we can't wait until May or June. There's absolutely no reason. I just thought we keep having workshops that we could at least get one of the items taken care of. If the board decides they want to wait till May or till June, we'll do whatever the majority of the board votes on. If the board's not ready to vote, we can let it go. Do we still have another workshop pending?
Yes, there is. So we have these are our opportunities, right? May 15th, we have the regular school board meeting, but then also June 5th is a budget workshop if we need it as well. In essence, June 19th is when we do need to pass our approved budget for 23-24.
And if we keep having workshops, the information will change based on what the state legislature is doing, or will it change based on revenue? What would it change?
Multiple factors, right? Just depending on when bills get passed, first off. So that's a big piece. We'll also get other pieces of information that help us put the pieces together in the puzzle, if you will. The one thing to keep in mind, though, it does take incredible amount of time to put these scenarios in place. And so as we work toward that June 19th deadline, direction, if you will, guidance from recommendations from the board are appreciated, so that way we can put those into our scenarios and we can bring forth a budget package that is known and understood and has good figures.
So are you saying that the longer we wait, the more clear the estimations will be?
Potentially, because right now we're looking at these scenarios based on what's moving through the legislative session.
Ms. Cantu.
Mr. Arredondo?
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. So, Mr. Doyle, going off of Ms. Cantu's last comment, so by June 19th, we'll know what the basic allotment is from DEA?
We hope. If by then the session should be over and there should be some approval. If it goes into special session, who knows, right?
if it were to be based on the legislation that is currently being worked out, it would reflect the forecast in the second, I guess, hypothetical that you presented on the first page?
Correct, that
Like the
6250,
modest
yes.
increase in basic allotment. So, all things being equal, unless something drastically changes in legislation, we kind of have a general idea of what that number might be. We just might have confirmation of what that number might be.
Right, we don't have confirmation, correct. It's what, I go back to, it's what the most active bill, if you will, in terms of funding, that has passed the House and now it's in the Senate.
I have one more comment, Ms. Cantu, and then I have a motion. So,
We
It was-
still have some other people who want to comment, so we're not ready for motion.
okay, well, so in regards to what we're currently looking at here, Mr. Shanks, for the purposes of transparency, I requested that this happen not tonight, but in April, but given scheduling formulas, a budget workshop that I didn't even know about on a Saturday, that didn't happen. And so when it got brought to my attention that we were voting on it in May, or the board would be voting on it in May, I reached out to Trustee Mejia, President Cantu, and said, I'm interested in utilizing board policy to bring it tonight. Is my understanding or my impression that the variables that exist this evening, the unknowns that exist this evening, are going to be the same ones that potentially a future board would have later in May, in 2 weeks? And so given the information, given the process that this board had undertook, I felt that it was in the best interest of the ISD to have people who were here for the duration of that process vote on it this evening. There's a couple of reasons behind that. I guess one of them being, if you look at the most recent elections to the board, those incoming board members have chosen to abstain from votes that they felt they weren't a part of the process or they didn't have enough information. And that was in regards to both salary and benefit increases or superintendent evaluations. And so using the information that I had, what has historically happened as of the last 2 election cycles, and seeing what some of my colleagues have chosen to do by not voting, I thought it just made sense to be this evening. So obviously, if there's a different perspective of majority of the board, then, no action will be taken tonight, but I just want to be transparent and clear why it was here this evening. And that was based on my request and utilizing board policy.
Ms. Cantu,
Dr. Sami?
I know that there are some insurance implications for the school marshal program. Have those been included in the budget presented to us?
I'm sorry, I didn't fully hear.
I believe there are some implications for our insurance when we enacted a school marshal program. I know that we were instructed to consult with our
Right.
insurance.
Yes, so budgeting the school marshal program right now is that.
Okay, and that includes changes to insurance due to that?
Correct.
Okay. And my other comment was along the lines of whether or not we should vote on this tonight. There will be a different board who is accountable to the budget that we're considering at this time. And I think that there is an argument and a point of view to say that those people who will be held accountable to this budget, who will have to make decisions based on the budget we pass this year, are not present. And so I think that there is also a case to make that the people who will be using this budget going forward should be involved in the decision-making process.
Anyone else? Mr. Shanks?
So also, I noticed in that House Bill, was it 100, that they're talking about changing the way they compute. They're going to base it off enrollment.
It depends.
There's a possibility.
It programmatic. Certain programs would go from ADA-based to enrollment, for example, CTE, but some others would still remain as an ADA. So it's a mixture of the two.
Are we expecting that to impact our finances slightly?
Again, I fall back to the program. The one I point out is Career and Tech. There's a lot of rumbling from the Career and Tech side of how it's shifting that funding mechanism dramatically. But yeah, it depends on the program. We would see either increases or what have you, depending on the program.
But overall, the allotment of what our normal allotment is, it's still gonna be computed pretty much the normal way for the majority of our students.
Roughly, yes.
Okay. I wasn't clear when I was reading the bill that's how that works, so.
Did that
thank you.
pass already?
It hasn't passed. It passed House. It still has to go to Senate.
It's moved from the House into the Senate.
I know that was one of the big decisions that when the Central Texas School Board members met, that was one of the big things that everybody was pulling for based on enrollment and not ADA, because that was gonna help everybody.
You might want to explain the career and technology funding moving negatively.
Correct. So the theory goes, the shift on the career and tech funding mechanism, it's based on trying to provide assistance for rural and small districts who have a difficult time providing at least 55% of their allotment. So currently, whatever we get for career and tech, 55% of that total has to be spent directly on career and tech. Some of these smaller school districts struggle, and so the idea behind the shift was removing that 55% and then also increasing the regular allotment, if you will, shifting that money from career and tech to regular allotment with the mindset that districts would fund career and tech. So that's kind of the understanding of how that shift has come about.
Ms. Halsey?
Yeah, could we go back again, sorry, one more time to the budgeting past and future revenue slide?
Which, this one?
No, but a few more. Oh, no, skipped it, there we go.
Okay,
So I just want to be clear that while I understand that there's a lot of science that goes into the budget prediction, there's also a little bit of guesswork, and that over the past, since 2018 years, we have approved deficit budgets wherein then the actual revenue has been greater than what we originally projected the revenue would be, and we have returned money to the fund balance every year. So I understand that what we're looking at with all of these pay increases looks like there's a big difference between the revenue and what we would be committing to, but also we have done that consistently because this is not a formula that just works where you can plug it in and have it be exact, right?
Correct, yes.
Which is all to say, I'm in favor of a generous increase to all staff. But again, I just remain concerned that we're going to get caught up in the state timing. And I'm not sure how to do that because I want to let our teachers and our staff know that we really want them to come back. I know we've weathered a couple of very difficult years, and I appreciate people who have stuck with us. I know things have been hard and they've been changing, and I think that the staff who are here are doing a tremendous job. I just have been paying a lot of attention to what's going on with the senior class, right? And today is decision day for seniors, and they're going to be having a big ceremony on Friday where students are going to be announcing, and we have kids that I think will probably be a historic number of students who are attending Texas State. We have probably a historic number of students who are attending UT, and then we have students who are going to be attending trade school, who are going to be graduating with their associate's degree for the first time in our history, and we're going to have students attending other colleges across the state going into the military, I think probably in record numbers for this class. I'm hoping Ms. Mossman has that to show us, but that's what I'm seeing anecdotally, right? So I certainly want to ensure that we can keep people coming back and working with us and keeping that trend moving. I'm really reluctant about getting ahead of the state in that sense, and then that's my concern.
Ms. Cantu.
Mr. Arredondo?
I have one last question. Mr. Doyle, in regards to the increase in basic allotment that legislatively requires us to give a percentage of that to salary increases, does it say who those salary increases go to, or is it just staff salary increases in general?
It does. So you'll see those two figures within that column of 75, 25 total gain. So you have to take that 30% of your total gain, and of that 30%, 75% has to go to teachers, nurses, librarians, and counselors. The other 25 has to go toward other personnel, other full-time personnel. So you can see those two figures right there. That 645,000 would go toward your teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians, and then the 212 would go to other full-time staff.
So the 212 would be for administrative staff, yeah. Mr. Redondo?
Thank you. I don't see in this budget document the cost for insurance. I know you gave us the monthly contribution that the ISD kicks in, but do we have the cost of?
It's the 4.7 figure,
It's built in.
and it's built in.
It's built into all of our salaries already, so it's already shown as a cost when you see the full budget.
So in the final page where it gives projected deficit based on the 4 models, baseline is that the benefits are included in all of those.
Correct.
Mr. Redondo?
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. Okay,
We're still in workshop, we're not ready to go to the, if you're fixing to make a motion,
Yeah, I am.
we will not go into the item until we get out of workshop. So this workshop allows everybody a chance to ask questions and feel clear about what's going on with our salaries.
So I'm sorry, I have one more question then. So going back to the basic allotment increase, if we have to, regardless of what the basic allotment increase is, if we're mandated to divide it 70-30, then we'll be mandated to take that increase, it doesn't actually work retroactively then, right? I mean, if we approve something tonight, because they're not saying that we'll have to give a 4% increase, right? If the state says we're going to give a 4% increase to teachers, and too bad, San Marcos, you already gave a 4% increase to teachers, now you have to do an 8% increase, right? That's where we would get caught. But if they're saying you just have to allocate whatever increase we give you back to teachers and staff, then it's not
Well,
going in the percentage loop.
but traditionally, it's been based on when that is signed in, so anything done prior to doesn't count toward those figures that you're seeing there. So those 75, basically that 860,000 would have to then be applied toward any kind of compensation increase.
Additionally.
Correct.
So if we made an adjustment tonight, we would then additionally have to make an adjustment that totaled 860,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and I say that based on prior law,
Right.
prior
Again, yeah,
statutes.
it could be different.
Correct.
Understood.
It's the first year we get a model with a 4% increase, because in the past, I thought we usually gave 2 and 3%, and then a separate amount for the hourly.
So this is from years, 5-year look historically from compensation increases from 18-19 to 22-23.
This is what they voted. There have been times when we have done like 1A, 2A,
Right.
1, 2B,
Correct.
like 5 scenarios.
Right.
Can I add something that's been, Trustee Arredondo asked a question that's been digging in my mind. You asked about the vacancies, the 20 vacancies. When we staff and we make these projections, we project on an average teacher salary of 5 years. We've seen that the majority of our teachers coming in are 0 to 1. They're less than that. But if we took those 20 vacancies, for example, and we didn't calculate those in, it would be about $1.4 million that we ended up not spending last year by not having those vacancies filled. Does that make sense? Okay, I tried to do the math in my head.
Anyone else? You don't have any more to present to us? Now you want to ask us questions? Oh, just kidding. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Good workshop. So Now we can move into the next step. Item 6, consideration and possible action of general pay increase for the 23-24 school year. Mr. Redondo?
Thank you, President Cantu. My colleagues will bear with me. Move that the board approve a general pay increase equal to 3% for classified employees, 2% for other professionals, and continuation of insurance premiums for ISD staff.
I'll second.
Ms. Cantu?
We have a motion and a second. I was writing everything down.
Yeah.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Yes.
Thank you.
We're in discussion phase now.
Yes, so I've kept every board book that has ever been sent to me since I was elected to the school board. And right now, I'm looking at the February 20th in 2015, in which our projected ending fund balance was about 31 million and change. So since being elected to the school board, every year we go through this exercise. Can we afford salary and benefit increases? Every year. Every year we're presented with a deficit budget. Every year folks say, if we vote for this, we're not gonna have money next year. Since then, we've voted and supported 8 consecutive salary and benefit increases. We have continuously gone to Dr. Cardona and staff and said, if students want to participate in extracurriculars and money is the obstacle, we should pay for it. During the pandemic, we said that we were going to go above and beyond to provide for our families and our students. Some saying that that was also being fiscally irresponsible. Time and time again, we've done things for our students, for our staff, and for our community. And after 7 years, I still really don't understand how this budget process works, because if you look at the articles for every budget cycle, 9 million deficit, 7 million, 6, 13. The fund balance is larger today than it was when I was elected. It's actually twice as big. We've done all of these things that were gonna financially ruin the ISD, and I still don't understand how it's panned out the way that it has, but I'm thankful that it has. And so at baseline, as we end the year, I think our staff deserve to know what they're gonna make. I understand that things might change legislatively. Someone who's there every day, I can say don't hold your breath, and I'm sorry for that. But the information that's presented in front of you is gonna be the information that's available later this month and in June. And I agree with Trustee Halsey that I don't want to penalize the ISD for giving raises early, and that's why I've intentionally left out teachers, which I know is probably gonna be a point of contention, but every scenario shows us that a lion's share of the raises at any percentage increase is gonna be for teachers. And so I do think that there should be flexibility from a future board and knowing what the legislature's gonna do. But given the fact that we are only required to give 25% to all other ISD employees, my concern is that the classified and other professionals get left behind when only 25% is required to be allocated to them. So that's why I'm asking that you consider taking action tonight, continue the tradition of paying for our employees' insurance for all eligible employees, and continue providing for classified and other professional staff. And then a future board can come back and talk about increases for teachers and addressing compression, which, again, for all of the scenarios presented by staff is a lion's share of what the salary and benefit increase projected deficit is gonna be.
Dr. Salmi?
Yeah, that was dramatic, and I haven't had that experience in the 2 years that I've been on the board, that there's been much objection to raises across the board. We've actually done that. So I don't think there's much of a risk to us singling out certain classifications of employees and not giving them. And again, I'm going to state that I think the board members who will be accountable to this budget should be allowed to vote on it, and I think that that's valuable. And should they choose to abstain because they haven't had the benefit of these meetings, that's a choice that we should give them to make, just like I was given when I joined the board. I think putting it ahead of that election just sort of gives an opportunity for some grandstanding on the way out that I'm not in favor of.
Ms. Halsey?
Yeah, so I'm actually in favor of a 4% general pay increase across the board for all of the categories with the longevity plan. And I appreciate staff bringing us that longevity plan. I think that addresses some real critical needs that we have in the district, and I appreciate that greatly. I also want to add an addendum to what Trustee Arredondo was saying, is that not only have we increased the fund balance from 31 million to 56 million, we've also dropped the tax rate, which I think does not get mentioned often enough, from $1.41 to $1.13, which is a 28 cents decrease, which is significant and also lower than almost every district surrounding us. And we have done that while we have been trying to be as competitive as possible with our salary and benefits packages. And so I think it's really critical that we continue to be as competitive as we can, especially when we're seeing other districts shedding teachers, shedding principals, shedding families, shedding students, and we want to continue to make San Marcos be a district of destination and distinction for all of those people. I want people to move here because they want to have their kids in our public schools. I want people to move here because they want to be teachers in our schools. I want people to move here because they want to be our principals, even if that means that the UIL is going to say that I'm recruiting, then I'm recruiting, come to San Marcos, right? So that's the action I want to see taken. And I think that the state is going to continue to come up with more money, and it'll probably come out in drips and drabs, but that gap that is there will shrink, as it has continuously shrunken. So that's the motion that I'm comfortable with. I'm going back and forth, honestly, on whether or not to just do it tonight or put it into May. I think that there's good arguments on both sides of that. I also have vehemently disagreed with voting on agenda prep meetings for a long time now, and I still think that we should not be voting on agenda prep meetings.
Oh, no, what?
But
I didn't understand.
that's where I'm at the moment.
And
Mr. Shanks?
That's
Oh.
not the motion on the.
Mr. Shanks?
No, I know.
Ms. Villalpando?
I understand.
Villalpando?
Oh, I just wanted to mention that whether we do it now or whether we do it later, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter to the new board members that are coming on. But the thing about it is that when Mr. Arredondo talks about the budget, and we always have carryover or whatever you were saying about the budget, we're fortunate that the staff stays on top and is not spending money just because we said we were gonna have a budget of a certain amount. The budget is not written in stone, and it is a moving target. It depends on how the school year goes. It depends on what we have to do to make sure that our staff and students get the optimum benefit of whatever has been approved. But it's fortunately, as long as I've been here, we've had a carryover. And that doesn't mean that they didn't spend it, but the way we wanted to. It just things that happened during the year. It's not you had to spend it just because we put it in as a budget item. That's all I have to say.
I think we're fortunate to have good financial people.
Absolutely.
In our case with our calculating and projecting, and I think we're real fortunate that we're not in the hole because the administrative staff is there for us. Ms. Halsey?
Sorry, I did have one question. So the models each project a 2%, 3%, 4%. What does 2%, 3%, 4% look like in terms of a dollar amount for our hourly staff? Because I know in the past we'd approved percentages, and we sort of went away with that because sometimes the percentage might look good and ended up being smaller than we'd hoped. So what does that look like in real dollars?
So those are included, in here, under clerical, professional, and auxiliary. Those are the overall dollar amounts to those two categories.
No, I mean, like, if our starting pay is $15 an hour, does it go up to 16? Like, what does it look like for our
It would be
employees?
whatever the 4% increase in that particular category, it's based on the market comparison. So they would take our market and look at the midpoint, and it would be 2%, 3%, 4% of that midpoint to increase the salaries by that amount. So it would depend on where you fall in our salary plan. It wouldn't be a specific amount.
Then I would suggest that we also consider doing a specific dollar amount for our hourly employees rather than a percentage. But
That's what we've done in the past. It's always been a dollar amount, hasn't it? Or have we always?
we've done different things, but.
I like the dollar amount, because that way you can tell them this much instead of figure it out.
Well, I think it also matters, employees understand the difference of whether or not they're making $18 an hour or $18.05 an hour or $20 an hour, right?
So for example, if a person was at $19.30 an hour, what percent did you do?
The lowest pay grade for hourly is starting at $16.25. $19.30 is the midpoint. So we would do $19.30 times 4%. That would equal 77 cents. So that would be an increase of $11.54 for the whole year. So $1,154 for the whole year if you work 8 hours and you work 187 days, which is the least amount of days that we have a calendar for. So that would be their annual.
1,100, what was the amount?
1154, 1,154. And that's a 77-cent increase for an 8-hour employee on a 187-day calendar.
Thank you.
For which scenario?
For the hourly, right?
4%.
4%?
Yeah.
So right now, the motion is 3% for classified and 2% for others, plus continue with insurance premium. That's what the motion on the floor that was made and seconded.
Yes, ma'am.
Any more comments? Ready for the vote? Yes or no? Are we ready? All in favor, please raise your hand.
We're doing the first motion, right?
We're doing the motion you seconded.
Oh, I'm changing I'm going yes, sorry.
Start again. Raise your hands if you're for, sorry. 1, did you vote? 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 2. The motion carries. So we've got 3% for classified and 2% for others.
Madam President,
Yes, ma'am?
I'd like to make a motion that we table additional salary discussions to a future date.
Do I hear a
I
second?
second it.
I hear a second from Mr. Shanks. All in favor of the motion to table all other position increases for a later date, please raise your hand.
Give a motion a second, does that mean we get discussion?
I'm asking for, we're showing the motion. First,
But do we get to discuss
Yes.
the
Yeah.
motion to table?
yes, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Halsey, were you interested in acting on teachers tonight or waiting?
I would like to wait until the next board meeting for teachers. I also probably plan at the next board meeting to introduce an increase for the motion that we just passed, because I'm in favor of being consistent with our principals and our professional staff and doing the same increase that we do for teachers. I've historically been in favor of that. I think that's the appropriate way, especially if we're going to also introduce a longevity increase for teachers. And I would like to see that that 2% or the 3% for classified actually be increased to, if not the 77 cents, then to even $1. I think that our employees deserve that in this market. So I voted in favor of it to ensure that we can at least get this much, and also because then I can bring it back as another item in the next meeting. So we need to make sure that that's added to the agenda.
The current motion is to table the remaining discussion on salary increases. All in favor, please raise your hand. 6, 7. 7. That motion passes, that we will continue the discussion on the increases at the next board meeting or later on.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Shanks makes the motion. Anyone want a second?
Second.
Ms. Diapando seconds. All in favor of adjourning? 7-0. Did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Thank y'all.